Redevelopment Division, Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. She's got 27 years of project management experience for complex state-funded remedial projects and has overseen multiple private party cleanup. Has she ever been to your place? But they're talking about private party cleanup efforts. I just wondered about it. Or maybe that's a different kind of, I don't know.
It's a different kind of party.
Different kind of party,
It's
okay.
a different party.
Yeah, she's
That's
all,
what you're gonna be doing after the meeting today.
she has also served as the
Free
administrative.
table up here for anybody that wants to sit up front.
She's also served as the administrative team leader for the North Kent PFAS investigation, also the criteria team leader for the proposed Part 201 cleanup criteria rules, team leader for the Vapor Intrusion Technical Program Support Team, and the Grand Rapids District Office Vapor Intrusion Point of Contact, and has provided assistance related to the vapor intrusion pathway on numerous projects. And she is currently serving on the Michigan PFAS Response Action Team Technical Advisory Work Group. I have no idea what any of this means.
What it means is I stick my nose into a lot of stuff.
And we also have Paul Knorr over here. He is the MDEQ Remediation and Redevelopment Project Manager in the Grand Rapids District Office, current project manager of the 120th PFAS study area, which is the Robinson Elementary School situation. He has almost 28 years of experience working with the environmental field as a consultant and 12 years with the DEQ. He covers leaking underground storage tank sites in Ottawa, Macomb, and Oceana counties, and currently manages non-leaking sites in Kent, Macomb, and Ottawa County. He holds a bachelor's in geology from Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois, and has a Master of Science in Geology and Geochemistry from the University of Iowa. And he had it on here, he says, "Go Blue."
No, it says go Hawks.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hawks and blue are very similar, they're spelled really close. Very, very similar. So anyway, I'm gonna turn it
Yes,
over
there's a
to-
whole table up here, people. Come on, don't be shy.
We'll turn it over to Abby,
Okay.
who's not shy either. So
I'm not shy, I'm not shy. Okay, so just to get an idea of who's in the room, how many of you would ever directly work with PFAS as part of your normal stuff? How many people actually got touched by PFAS so far this year? Okay, well, lucky you. The rest of you, lucky you. Although your jobs are very complex, and I know you guys have many programs that I don't even begin to understand. So can we just go around the room? I guess I'm wondering if, who's a sanitarian, who's a clinician, who's what? Can we just go through real quick? No, you just go through.
I'm immunization nurse.
Okay,
I'm a sexual health nurse.
I'm visiting social worker.
okay.
Food specialist. Environmental health, like
Excellent.
solid waste services supervisor.
Great.
We're the sanitarian group kind of here, so
Your which kind of group?
sanitarian.
Sanitary group, okay.
On site, yeah.
Okay, all right. Oh, you're all sanitarians back there. The whole corner of sanitarians? Nobody wants to claim anything different? Okay.
Clinic support.
Clinic support, okay. Excellent, excellent. How about the back, Sue?
Sorry, nurse.
Nurse. Excellent, excellent. All right, that corner.
Sexual health nurse.
Okay.
Sexual health. Sexual health.
Lord, okay.
Sexual health nurse. Sexual health tech.
Wow, I know where to go for help then. Okay.
We're all communicable disease and tuberculosis nurses.
Okay. See, this is where your job's really,
Yeah, we don't know anything
you got
about
your
that.
mouth full too. Go ahead.
Epidemiologist.
Okay. IT.
Administrative.
Administrative. We know our medical director.
Community health worker.
Community health.
Food specialist.
Now food specialist and
Community health.
community health. Okay. All right. One more.
Food.
Food. All right. All right. Nancy shovels in the pizza. So as Paul said, I'm district supervisor for the Grand Rapids office for remediation and redevelopment. So what Paul and I do is we have all of those sites that have groundwater and soil contamination. Air goes to another division, water goes to another division. We've got subsets of groups just like you do. But PFAS has become one of those things that has like overtaken our world, as you guys know, and has really become not just the hot topic, but an emerging issue that really has forced us into a new arena. You know, we've always had interactions with the local health departments, but we've never had to be sitting in the same room with you month after month after month, because now we have to share that data. So I'm gonna go through some of the basics, because I don't think most of you guys have that basic knowledge. Matt's heard a lot of this, so we're just gonna go through the basics. You guys tell me what you want more information on, because I could spend hours talking about PFAS, but at some point you're gonna just say enough. Let's move on. And there is some really interesting science that goes with this, so let's do the basics. So, yada, yada, yada. What are PFAS? So these are chemicals that are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. That's the short name. Developed in the late 1940s, started really coming into use in the 1950s. They're man-made. They do not occur naturally in the environment. It is not something that you would have seen in products or in, you know, your old county dumps or in your old landfills before the 1950s. But what they do is, this is the stuff that we love. We love these PFAS chemicals because they make all of our stuff heat resistant, makes all of our Teflon, it's resistant to the oils, the stains, the waters. So you've got carpet that's probably got PFAS in it because it makes your carpet stain resistant, right? Your couch is sprayed with what? When you get a new couch, you always pay a couple extra $100 to have the couch sprayed down so the kids don't dump the stuff on it. Well, it's got that coating in it. The coating is PFAS. It may be a newer generation of PFAS, but it is PFAS. The most prevalent ones that we've studied so far today are about PFOS and PFOA. Those are an 8-chain carbon to fluorine bond structure that makes it very, very tough. I forgot my model, Paul.
You should have brought your
My son
three-dimensional.
My son has done a 3D print of a PFOS molecule for me that I like to bring, and I forgot it. But this compound is so stable in the environment, and that's what makes it so great. That's why we loved it, because you can't break it down with heat unless it's like 2,000 degrees. You're not gonna break it apart in the environment, and so it makes it great for industrial products, but it's really bad for our environment because it doesn't break down. So you've got this carbon-fluorine bond, you've got the hydrophilic head, and part of the other thing that this is also used for our firefighting foam, which again makes a great product for firefighting. This is the PFOS, and what you have is you have a head that likes to stick, this chemical likes to sit at the, in the water, right at the top of the water interface with the air. So the head sticks in the water, the tail of this molecule sticks in the air, and as the wind comes over it, it creates foam. And so as we see from all the news features you see on PFAS, they always show a picture of the foam. Picture at the Rockford Dam, a picture at the Thornapple Dam, wherever they're taking a picture of foam. It's because of this, because when the wind starts generating it, it sits at that interface, and it'll create man-made foam in an environment that you wouldn't normally see it. So that's one of the things we've seen. You're gonna use it, a lot of surfactants will have it in there. They have outlawed the PFOS and PFOA. They're no longer manufacturing those two compounds right now, but in the United States, they still make it in China. So if you get Chinese-made products, you can still get it. But what you need to know is that there's 5,000 chemicals in this family of PFAS. When I say PFAS, that's the family. When you hear people say PFOS, they're generally saying PFOS. I will spell it out because I think it's easier to make sure you guys know what I'm talking about. But 5,000 chemicals in this family, we only have laboratory analytical equipment that'll pick up about 40. So we're only sampling for a very small subset. We got this whole fingerprint of chemicals that we know are out there, but we don't have any science for it. We don't have any technology. So while you read the news articles that say, well, this stuff's been around forever and you guys should have been sampling for it and you knew about this and DuPont's known about this. Well, nobody else in the academic world or in the technology world, science world, has known how to actually detect this stuff. We've just recently gotten down to parts per trillion to actually be able to detect this stuff. So that's where it's an emerging contaminant comes from. It's not emerging because it's new. It's emerging because we finally got the technology to marry with the science, to marry with the knowledge that we know it's there. So keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, like I said, lots of uses, lots of things that we have in our environment. If we had to get rid of all the PFASs, all the different uses, we'd have an entirely different society. And I don't know if we could do it. We don't have, just for the AFFF, that's what we call our firefighting foam. AFFF specifically refers to a Class B firefighting foam. If Nick Bonstel's talked to you guys at all about some of his emergency management practices, AFFF is specifically Class B firefighting foam that they use for petroleum fires. It's not the firefighting foam that they use for house fires. 99% of what they do is house fire type stuff. They're gonna use that Class A foam, does not have PFAS in it. But the Class B, when the tanker spills over on the road and you got the guy that's trapped inside, they literally wanna get that fire out within 3 minutes. So that stuff smothers the vapors that would reignite. So they can, it's a life and death emergency situation. They use Class B foam, but it's really important that they do, because if you're in an airplane that's on fire, or you're in a tanker truck that's got 6,000 gallons of gasoline on the backside of it, you need that out now. So it's the only thing we've got. We do not have a substitute right now for Class B foam. And unfortunately, 99% of what Class B foam is PFAS. So the science, again, has got to come up to date with what we know to be the ecological concerns and the physiological concerns. So part of the issue with this PFAS family is it's very pervasive. It travels very easily in the environment, it doesn't break down, doesn't naturally degrade, and it will bioaccumulate. Now, I don't know, has anybody read any of the NHANES stuff on PFAS yet for PFAS levels in the, no, nobody? This is like geeky stuff. You're all health people. Okay, go look at the NHANES data for the PFAS in the average blood content of the average American, because we all have PFAS in our blood. And I think I got a slide on this, so hold on, I'll get you there. We're gonna talk about health effects, not a lot of data. The biggest source of data we have right now for PFAS is DuPont had a release of PFOA to, Parkersburg, West Virginia, right? They had a huge release that got into the water system, got into the municipal system, fed an entire county of people with PFAS for many years. Their workers were having deformities in their babies, so on and so on. So they did what is called the C8 study. Google the C8 study, it's gonna come up with this stuff. It was a lawsuit of the area residents who sued DuPont for their damages. They actually won, which was pretty amazing, and then they turned around and gave the winnings of that to create the C8 study, to do a long-term health study from all 60,000 people who were injured for this, donated their money back. So it's, if you watch The Devil You Know, it's the movie, they talk about it. It's pretty horrific, but yet inspiring at the same time. Anyways, most of the information comes from that health study, because obviously we don't have health studies with, normal humans with that are willing to do this. So sufficient standards, we only have 3 things right now for PFOS, PFOA. Federal government has no regulatory standards for PFAS at all, which is why there's been a couple of PFAS summits at the congressional level. That's why EPA keeps getting thrown under the bus on a lot of things, because they have not actually promulgated any criteria. They have the EPA lifetime health advisory of 70 parts per trillion, which is an advisory, so it's not regulatory. There's no way to force anyone to clean up to 70 parts per trillion with an advisory. At the state level, we have an actual cleanup criteria. We have something that's actually has regulatory enforcement abilities to it. It mirrors the 70 parts per trillion. And I'm gonna go into that a little bit more as we get through these slides. So when we talk about the pervasiveness of PFAS, I want you to think about a typical water cycle. Everybody's seen this kind of a schematic for the water cycle. As you got your industry, and as they have releases, it gets into the groundwater, it gets into the stream. As they have normal process discharges, it goes from their industry through the wastewater treatment system to the wastewater treatment plant. PFAS doesn't get treated by the wastewater treatment plant. It doesn't, it's not gonna be attacked by that normal biological action that a wastewater treatment plant would do. So the PFAS just passes through. So when you get your industry discharging your PFAS, ends up in your wastewater treatment plant, where does it go? Well, it goes to a couple different places. It may end up as leachate, or it may end up as solid sludges to your landfills. It may end up as a biosolid to your farm fields, or it may end up with the water, after all of that stuff's pulled out, the water may end up as a discharge to your rivers. Now, that PFAS can go all of those places. We're talking parts per trillion. The regulatory limit right now for discharge of PFAS to the stream is 12 parts per trillion. So we're talking about very, very low numbers. We know from sampling around the state of several wastewater treatment plants that it does get to the biosolids, and then once it's applied to the farm fields, we know we can have an issue there too. So that whole cycle is very interrelated. How do we cut this off? How do we actually take and stop the PFAS? Where in that cycle is the best place to cut it off? Because we don't have an answer, but we're working on it. And because of this issue, Governor Snyder threw into, really, I think this was really because of Wolverine, threw into action the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. And that was November of 2017. And at that point, we never had an actual interagency committee to work on one single issue. I worked for the state for 27 years, and I've never seen anything like this. But this brings all of the departments together. So we work with Department of Ag, we work with, the MDOT, and with the Fire Marshal Division, and we work with Department of Health and Human Services, and we've got them all there at the table to make these decisions, because what I decide is gonna directly affect the farmer, is gonna directly affect the airport, who's getting regulated by DOT, is gonna directly affect every little fire station that's in everything. So there's no way to separate those decisions. So all of that's being done under MPART, which is now being guided by the governor's office through DEQ. Public health obviously is our main concern with this, but just trying to get some standardization. There's nobody else in the country that's doing this. Some of the other states have individual projects that they've worked on for a while. Minnesota's got a big effort with PFAS because they had a lawsuit against 3M. But 3M works in, has a factory industry in their state, and so Minnesota sued 3M, got almost $1 billion out of it. But they have a large area of impact. So they sued for that one section, but they haven't done a statewide evaluation yet. We need to figure out how often it happens, what kind of sources. We're getting there. All these things are getting done through MPART. So far, we've got about 40, I think it might even be closer to 50 now, sites where we know we have groundwater contamination that exceeds 70 parts per trillion. And I'll show you those. We've done a statewide drinking water analysis. So I think everybody was aware of that. That's how Robinson Elementary got hit, was, and Parchment was found because of this drinking water analysis. So they went through and have sampled about 1,100 municipal systems across the state. We've done rivers and lakes and streams, we've done some biosolids, fish and deer, landfill leachate sampling. We're gonna get to those. Here's the spectrum of what we know right now. There's a lot more than this, it's just, this is what is currently on our radar. The potential for these, if you think about every single, and maybe you guys don't think about the plating facilities or fabric coaters, if you got any textile industries in your area where they would be making that fabric for your couches or that carpet or any of that stuff where they would have PFOS. Wolverine was an issue because they scotch guarded their shoes and they actually dipped it in there. So these are all sites of environmental contamination. I don't believe that Robinson is on here yet because we do not have, we're very close to having the data to show that we have groundwater over 70, but we didn't put the school on because the school doesn't, drinking water samples weren't what we were looking for. This is just to show that our statewide testing is pretty much done. I gotta update my slide because it is pretty much all done now. 1,119 community water supplies across the state. That's 75% of the drinking water for the state. 75% of our people for the whole state are actually on municipal water. So we know that they are all safe at this point. 461 schools sampled, and unfortunately for Robinson Elementary was the only one over 70. We've also included daycares and Head Start facilities, so they're getting looked at, and I think that sampling's just about done. Some of the Head Start facilities didn't open up and their wells weren't available, so they're going back to get those, but I'm expecting that that'll be done here probably in the next month. Foam, so we've done a lot of ambient monitoring of the surface water. One of the interesting things that we've found is that how many people have been to the Rockford Dam? A couple people, okay. We all go now for one thing or another. The Rockford Dam, there's always foam at the bottom of the dam. We've all seen it. It looks kind of pretty, but yet it's not when you think about why it's there. The interesting piece of this is that when we sample the surface water at the same location as we take a foam sample, we'll do both samples at the same time. Surface water generally comes back fairly low. 10, maybe 20 parts per trillion in the surface water. But when I talked about that PFOS liking to hang out at that very top skim coat of the water column, right at the air interface, what we find in the foam at that same location is that because of the high strength source we've got coming from Wolverine, is that we have about 260,000 parts per trillion of PFOS in the foam. So huge difference. But we gotta know what those, what's a, I don't wanna use the word background because it's not naturally occurring, but what's a background level of PFOS in our environments? Our POTWs, our wastewater treatment plants, what do those look like? A lot of them, we had about 33 across the state that did have some exceedances of the 12 parts per trillion. And we had a couple, there was a plating facility over in Lapeer that was sending the Lapeer wastewater treatment plant's numbers through the roof. And so they've been working on that for almost a year and a half now, trying to get those numbers down. Because every time this stuff continues to get discharged into the wastewater treatment plant, then it circulates through the whole river system and then into the fish, and we've got that bioaccumulation issue. So it doesn't, dilution is not the solution to this pollution. Let's make it that way. Industrial direct dischargers, so we've got a lot of people who get permits to filter their stuff and then directly discharge it to our rivers and streams. PFAS has never been included in those sampling events. So we're having a lot of those people sample for PFAS to make sure they're not discharging it as well. And then surface water foam. We've got a couple of air bases, military installations up in the Grayling and Oscoda, Wordsmith area that have done so much firefighting training over the years because they're big installations. They usually train all of the local responders as well, that there's so much PFOS in some of the surface water bodies around there that they get naturally occurring foam blowing up every time it gets windy on their lake. And so this is actually a photo of, I don't know if this is Lake Van Etten or if it's Lake Marguerite, but it just takes a little bit of foam or a little bit of wind and that meniscus off the top of the water column churns right up and everybody's calling us. Actually, they were talking about installing a camera, a video camera, on a pole at the lake so they could do a phone cam. That's how crazy it got. So this is just talking about our industrial pretreatment stuff. I'm not gonna go too much into that. Biosolids, this has been very interesting. So the Lapeer plater that was discharging at pretty high levels into the wastewater treatment plant, then was taking, and they had about 30 fields around the area that Lapeer would do biosolids, and they would take their treatment sludges and apply them as a nutrient for the soils. Well, we know because of very high levels of PFAS in them, that we needed to understand the relationship between how much was getting into the soil. Does that then make a groundwater contamination issue? Does that mean that you're gonna get plant uptake? Does it get into the corn? Does it then get into all that corn that's grown on a biosolid field? Does that mean then that the cows that are fed the silage are getting it into their beef, their milk, all their products? The cycle goes on. We don't know that yet, but that's what we're working on. I think there's been some corn samples taken. There has been, they're finding that some of the smaller chain, the 6 carbon, the 4 carbon PFAS molecules will get taken up into the leaves and stuff, but that the heavier 8 carbon, 10 carbon, 12 carbon chains tend to stay in the roots. And that there's been some studies that even the skins of the potatoes will hold the PFAS, but the inside of the potato doesn't. So, I don't know, it's all kind of weird, but a lot of research is gonna be going on, and I think just about every single university in the state is actually doing research on PFAS, so the next couple of years will be pretty exciting if you're into that kind of stuff. Let's go through the findings. Like I said, municipal water system stuff, we had just the one, we had Parchment, and then we had one that was Robinson Township. That is pretty much done now. And I'm gonna let Paul talk a little bit about Robinson Township, just a brief overview of what we've done there. And then we'll come back after he gets done, and we're gonna actually talk about the health, some of the health stuff that they're finding with PFAS, because I think that would be directly applicable to what you guys wanna know, how does this really affect our people? So Paul, you wanna jump in for a few minutes?
So how this kind of started again was, Abby mentioned, we did this statewide testing initiative. And so October 29th, 2018, we got a telephone call that said that results had come back from the Robinson Elementary School for the first sampling. I think the first sampling was done on September 18th. And so it takes some time to get results back. All the results that we're doing analysis on generally go to California for analysis. And we were flooding so much information to the labs that it takes some turnaround time. It takes long turnaround time. So anyways, when we sampled the school, I think the school came back at 110 parts per trillion in that first initial sample. We contacted Grand Haven Area Public Schools and said, hey, you've got to put the whole school on bottled water. And so they ended up getting bottled water brought in pretty quickly. We contacted Ottawa County, and we had started having conversations about what we were going to do out here. The initial thing we did was we immediately sent our consultant who had been doing the sampling out to confirm that result. And so when they were out there, they also realized there was a daycare across the street from it. And we mentioned that there was a township hall up the way that we might be able to get some samples quickly on. And so they collected confirmation sample from the school, and they sampled this daycare across the street, and then they sampled at the at the fire department actually, at the corner of, right here at the corner of 120th and Buchanan. So that result came back at 119 parts per trillion, so it pretty well confirmed the result that we had PFAS. And when I'm talking about those concentrations, those are for just the 2 compounds, PFOS and PFOA, because those are the only ones we regulate. I think the total concentration for the 14 compounds we analyzed was like 144 in the first sample and 171 in the second sample. So we sampled the daycare across the street, and that came back at 4. So we're like, hey, that's way below our criteria. And the fire station came back at 5. And we're like, well, we actually found it 3/8 of a mile away to the north. And so it's like, obviously we may have a bigger issue out here just than the school. And so that kind of promulgated the fact that we were gonna create a bigger area around that to study. So we sampled that yellow area. And this was kind of and we had some input from Matt in Ottawa County about, hey, where's this gonna go? We kind of think groundwater in the area flows to the north. And one of the things about the aquifer, and you guys may know about this, the aquifer in Robinson Township is about 45 feet of water. So water's at about 6 feet below the surface, and there's a clay layer about 50 feet. So there's essentially 45 feet of water there that they can draw from. Very few wells out in that area are deeper than 50 feet. And so, anyways, when we got these results back, we sampled them. The green ones ended up all being non-detect, so we didn't detect any PFAS at all in those. The ones from 0 to 10, you can see there's a number of those around. I don't know, can I point with this or not?
Yeah, one, the middle, the top.
Oh, the top one,
Yeah, there
okay.
we go.
So, so you can see there's like this little string of yellow ones up here to the north that was some concern to us. And then we had some down in here, these yellow ones, and orange ones down in here. And we were like, well, we gotta do some sampling around that. So this is, shoot, now I'm not thinking of what the name of that road is, but south of this, it becomes agricultural fields. We don't have any residences to the south of this. So we really didn't have, we got some seasonal irrigation wells down in there, and we may end up having some communication with them here coming in the springtime once they start pumping water again and get their wells operational again, and they sample that again. What's that? No, this is, I can't think of the name of the street.
I think it's Ridge.
Yeah, it's Ridge.
Rich Street, correct, that's what it is, yeah, Rich Street. So anyways, but one of our concerns was some of these samples that were to the north here, so we expanded our area to this area here. Ottawa County did some communication with Spring Meadow Nursery up here, which we, at this point in time, we haven't seen results from yet. But you can kind of see we've got a little bit here going towards the north, and we think groundwater generally flows to the north. So let's see if we go to the next one here. Oh yeah. So these are the compounds at PFOS. These are the compounds for total PFAS. So this is the 14 compounds that we analyzed as part of this sampling analysis. And you can see there's more. Sorry, I'm going wrong. You can see there's more higher concentrations here to the north of other compounds other than the PFOS and PFOA. And that kind of, especially this one at the very north up here, this is the horse farm up here that was notorious. There was 183 parts per trillion total PFAS. There's only 9 parts per trillion of the 2 compounds that we analyzed. So we're not exactly sure why that well is quite as high as it is. But you can also see down here to the south that we've got a little bit as well, sort of in the vicinity of the school. So what we ended up doing, we have 2 wells that exceeded the PFOS and PFOA concentration of 70. And the one well I failed to mention is located right here, just to the north of the fire station, that had 89 parts per trillion. That was the only residential well out there that actually exceeded 70 parts per trillion. So we have 2 wells that exceed the school well and that one well. Most of the wells are shallow, seeing the aquifer 0 to 50 feet. Groundwater flows generally towards the north in this area, going towards the Grand River. And we needed an additional investigation to confirm the direction of groundwater flow. So we're kind of interpreting the direction groundwater flows based on chemistry in this circumstance. We're looking for the PFAS compounds, using those to actually dictate which direction groundwater flows. But that's not the optimal way to figure out which way water flows. The optimal way to figure that out is to actually install wells and actually measure the elevation of the water and then hydraulically determine which direction, because water will always flow downhill. You can always determine which direction groundwater flows. So we needed to do that in this circumstance. So this was our hydrogeological investigation. So these little blue dots, we installed permanent wells in those locations. And you can see there's 4 down here around, I keep hitting the wrong button. There's 4 down here around the public school, and then there's 3 of them up here in the vicinity of the township hall and the fire station. So that was kind of our investigation. We also did 4 additional locations for surface soil samples, because what we're looking for is, we're looking for where maybe this actually came from on the surface. Why would we have PFAS at a public school? Because the public school does appear to be kind of in the center of this whole thing, as well as the fire station. So what's causing this is what we're looking for out there. One of the other things that we're concerned about is, as Abby mentioned, these compounds like to stand up on the surface of the water, and then you can end up having a sort of collecting these in surface water bodies, and then if the foam was to blow across that lake, you could have, sort of you're creating a very, very intensely impacted foam. And so we wanted to sample that, because some of these people out here have dug their own ponds in the area. And so, so you can see these triangles, those are ponds that we're actually gonna sample here in the springtime now, once we get the ice totally off the lakes, and we'll do that as a second phase kind of this investigation. So at this point in time, we're just starting to see this data coming back, and we're kind of trying to figure out what this data actually means in conjunction with the information about the residential wells that we have out there. We're planning on reviewing that data. We're going to determine whether we need to do more residential sampling. We're going to need to determine whether we need to do more drilling. And based on the data, it does look like we're going to probably have to do some work a little bit north and east of the fire station, just based on what we're seeing for data. We're going to continue to update information to the MPART website, which is the state's website that Abby mentioned. And obviously, some of this information is being housed on your Ottawa County Department of Public Health webpage as well. And so we're gonna come up with some future plans for this in the future here, and that'll be presented in those locations. So, and then
Yeah, okay. I'll throw this up just because you guys need to know. I mean, this is all about health. So how many people knew that we had an Eat Safe Fish guide for the state? Good job, good job. All right, so I won't go into it too much, but just know that there's a few advisories out there for some different fish. You've got some carp, catfish, northern pike, suckers, walleyes, the largemouth, smallmouth bass, Lake Macatawa, some for Grand River. I think this is also the Grand River here. I don't think that most of the fishermen in our state realize we've got a statewide advisory for mercury. So while PFAS is an issue, I would say that our mercury is an issue too, and we definitely need to make sure that people know that. So I just threw this in so that everybody remembers. The Eat Safe Fish Guide is all online for every single water body in the state. Deer. So there was some statewide, as part of our collaboration between the departments, DNR, I love this word, they collected some deer and sent out their professional collection agencies and collected deer from around the state. We took them from areas that we knew had specific impacts. So they took some from northern Kent County, they took some from up by Oscoda, they took some from Grayling, they took some from down to the south part of the state, because we got some areas down by the Huron River that are at issue. What they found is out of the 80 deer that were collected, they had one deer out of the 80, or out of the 128, that actually had measurable levels of PFAS at levels that they thought were going to be, an issue for somebody who actually ate the deer. And it's not like the fish where you cut off. PFAS doesn't collect just in the body fat of the deer or the fish. Because it runs through the blood system, it's gonna be throughout the body. It's not something that you can just cut off certain parts and have it. But the good news is that, at least for the North Kent County, of which I'm most worried about, is we didn't find any deer with any kind of adverse effects because of PFAS. So we're still doing a lot of sampling. I'm gonna get on to, this is our MPART website. You guys can take a look at that when you get really bored, but just throw in michigan.gov PFAS response, and we've got a lot of stuff on testing and treatment. If you get people that wanna know about PFAS, there's stuff up there for homeowners. There's also a whole jump off page to DHHS and all of their health advisory stuff for again, homeowners and clinicians and anybody else who wants to know about PFAS. This is one I just throw up. This is on my kitchen sink, $250. It is by no way an endorsement for Aquasana. There are other vendors out there who have PFOS. These are what we call point of use, so they're under the kitchen sink. I believe this is what we probably threw in out at Robinson Township that you guys provided to the homeowners. Easier to install, and the nice thing that I like about it and why I put it on my house is not because I thought I had high levels of PFOS and PFOA, but it also takes out the herbicides, the pesticides, the naturally occurring metals, which, you know, we all have arsenic, and other things that are in our water, and, you know, truthfully, it tastes better. So let's talk about health. So this was some of the NHANES data, and you guys probably know what that stands for better than I do. But they test the blood for the population across the United States. This is 2000 to 2014, and because in 2002, was it, they phased it out?
Okay.
I'm trying to remember exactly when
Something
they
like
phased it
that,
out.
2002,
They started
2004.
phasing out the production and manufacturing of PFOS and PFOA in the United States. And you can see at that point then, the amount of PFOS in people's blood as a nation started going down. And so at this point now, we're down to a much lower level as a population, which is encouraging, but, you know, I just want to show that to you so you know that when you talk to people and they're worried about drinking 70 parts per trillion, or they're worried about these things, there are a lot of other sources of PFOS that they will be get some incidental ingestion routes. So we're going to talk about that. The associated health outcomes. So this is one of the things I think that's really interesting is that so far, from the C8 study that we talked about in West Virginia, they have an association for health effects. This isn't a known, this is not listed as a known carcinogen yet. But they have, you know, they're saying it's an associated, which means something to the toxicologist in the room. Yeah, so using an animal study, they've seen liver effects, the immunological effects, developmental effects, endocrine effects. So it does create thyroid issues. We got reproductive issues. The tumors, liver, testicular, pancreatic cancers are again associated. And so I think there's gonna be a lot more study on this stuff coming out in the years to come. So you'll see that. One of the interesting things that Minnesota has put out on their most recent study is, who is our toxicologist in the room? Which
Epidemiologist.
Epidemiologist, thank you. So there is a study out in Minnesota that talks about the toxicokinetic effects of PFOS, PFOA as a child is in fetal development, and then the placenta transfer, and then as it is developing with breast milk. The child in those first 3-4 years of life actually ends up with a blood level 7 times what the adult is. And so there is, I thought that was very interesting from Minnesota. So we're actually, when ATSDR is looking at, they came out with some minimum risk levels for PFOS, PFOA, and 4 other compounds last summer. The state is looking at those very closely because Department of Health and Human Services is going to probably recommend that our PFOS, PFOA number go down to 7 and 8. So that would make, instead of a 70 part per trillion, we would end up with like about a 14. So think about what that's gonna do to the calls to your department. I'm sorry. You're gonna get a few more calls. It hasn't come out yet, it's not final. They would be screening values, but it's gonna put a world of hurt on us, and you're gonna feel the effects too. And I wanna say, when you look at the numbers, PFOS ends up bioaccumulates more readily in the environment. We find it in the fish more at higher doses, but I think it's the PFOA that ends up with the higher toxicological issues for human responses. So we end up with, you know, liver effects, bilirubin and cholesterol issues. A lot of people talk about cholesterol being out of whack. Decreased vaccination response, asthma, birth weight for developmental effects, endocrine effects, reproductive, decreased fertility, cardiovascular, a whole lot of other things. Right now, they're saying, at least for PFOA only, that they're talking about the testicular and kidney cancers. You guys, this is your world. I'm just reading the slide. But this would normally be presented by our Department of Health and Human Services, Bill Farrell. He's doing this particular project for Robinson Township, and he would be able to go through this with you. But if you get anybody out in your community that's really interested in this stuff and is worried about that, I would really encourage you to have them call DHHS, because they've got people who are specifically on a PFAS team with their epidemiologists, their toxicologists who know this stuff inside and out. So we've just sat through enough presentations that we can pretend to be smart. As I said, Lifetime Health Advisory is based on a reference dose derived from a developmental toxicity study from rats. So is it the best way? Probably not, but that's what we've got. It is, right now, they're still saying that it is protective of an unborn baby against developmental effects. This Lifetime Health Advisory, though, did not take into because that Minnesota study just came out, it doesn't take into effect or into consideration that toxicokinetic effect of when you have a fetus that's developing, then you have the placental transfer, then you have that fetus still getting breast milk from the mother who's still drinking the impacted groundwater. And so when that collective effect then ends up at something that maybe 70 is not low enough. And that was a recommendation from MPART Science Advisory Board. We asked them that question, and their report came out last fall and did say, well, we're not going to give you a number, but we do recommend that it's probably lower than 70. So when you hear a lot of stuff on the news about EPA getting some guff about this number, that's part of the issue. ATSDR has already said that their minimum risk levels would be around the 10 to 11 to 14 range, and EPA is, obviously not getting a lot of support from the White House. So we'll see what happens on that one. We'll see. And then Governor Whitmer just asked DEQ to put together MCL for PFOS, PFOA this week, which means that would be a regulatory standard that we could use for drinking water. The 70 parts per trillion we have right now is for cleanups, for cleanup of groundwater used for drinking water, but it's not enforceable for a drinking water. So if we actually sent an MCL for the state, then we would be able to use it for all the municipal supplies around the state, which would be good. It'd be, it's good. It's going to be expensive, but it's good. And then they, when they did this reference dose, it was supposed to be protective for all the non-cancer and cancer effects. So they take a rat study, and I'm not gonna probably do this justice. Basically take the rat study, they extrapolate it down to what would be a human equivalent dose, take that then and make it protective for basically put safety factors on it for taking it from an adult to a fetal stage, and make that, set that as a level that's going to be safe for the most vulnerable people, like the fetal development. And then they take, and this is the interesting part about it, and this is what I really want you to know about this Lifetime Health number, is that the 70 parts per trillion is protective, assuming that that's what you're going to get out of your drinking water. So that's what that EPA assumes you're drinking 4 liters of that water every day for 70 years. It's a chronic exposure. It's a long-term exposure. It's not this, you're drinking 70 parts today, you're dead tomorrow thing. This is long-term, a lot of water, a lot of exposure. But what it also includes is that you're only getting 25% of your exposure is coming from that drinking water. So they put in safety factors. They say, okay, you're going to have an exposure of 70 parts per trillion or higher for 70 years, but that's only 20%. So you have the room in that exposure scenario to get the incidental ingestion from, okay, your food drops on the couch and you pick it up and eat it, and then it's, got a little PFAS, little Scotchgard in it. At one point, some of the popcorn bags had some PFAS in it. All your candy wrappers. The pizza boxes that have the white nice thing in there so that your pizza doesn't stick to the box, it's got a little PFAS on it. There are all these incidental exposures that we don't understand a lot about that come from our food and from our fancy way of living. Those are accounted for in this scenario, because that could be 3/4 of your exposure, with drinking water being the other 1/4. So just know, this is a pretty conservative number. And 70 parts per trillion is probably still gonna be very protective for most everybody. And this toxicokinetic effect is gonna get us to a absolute number where we're really not gonna have any effects ever. It's what I would call a nominal risk level. So we're debating on what to call it, because we can't just put another screening level out that doesn't tell people what it is. Okay, so anyways, so by the time the actual number, when you get down to this point, the actual number that they thought was allowable when they were developing the 70 parts per trillion was 350 parts per trillion, but then they added, being EPA, they add more safety factors onto it. And so that's what they did. They divided it and came up with 70 parts per trillion. So it's got a lot of safety factors in it, but just so you know, that's where we're at. And based on the science, I'll probably go lower. All right, and I think, why don't we open it up for questions, because I took all your time and you got 5 minutes left before you gotta go back to work. So why don't we see what you guys think? What part of it is the most disturbing or leaves you with the most questions? Go for it.
I've been seeing articles recently that like landfills are the #1 cause. Where that information, have you seen those?
Landfills obviously will have issues. It depends on where they got the waste from. So in North Kent County, we know that Wolverine sent, after the 1970s, they sent most of their tannery sludges to different landfills around the area. So those cells of landfill waste would be very high. But all the landfills are going through the process of being sampled. And we have, I'm thinking the landfill report is out. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but there was a subset of landfills that did do sampling. And then we're gonna look at what kind of, emissions they have from their leachate. Because every landfill has leachate, they can't help it.
I was just curious, seeing the articles, what inspired someone to do an article on it, if there was like new information out already that said
Yes.
the #1 source is landfills, like.
Well, a source is landfills. I would say it's not the #1 source.
Okay.
Is not the #1 source. I think based on magnitude of source, I hate to tell Wolverine this, but their source levels are still the highest of anything I've seen.
Okay.
Platers, electroplaters will use PFAS to create a skim coat on the top of their plating baths. I don't know if anybody here actually does any industrial type inspections, but they've got, when they do these plating baths, it's a low pH or a high pH, depending on what they're doing. It'll be heated and there's vapors coming off of it, and it stinks like hell. But they put the PFAS on top to keep those vapors down. It was regulated by the federal government that they had to start using this stuff back in the 90s. So they started using it on their plating stuff, baths, to keep those vapors down for worker safety, and it worked great. But then it, on the back end, we're now still finding lots of PFAS in their sludges. Those are another big source, because there's a lot of old-time platers out there that have, used to just dump to lagoons out the back door type of thing. So as you guys are doing inspections around, if you come across any of the old platers or any old industrial places that looks like they had lagoons that you think we should know about, feel free to share the information, because there's a lot of those old-time stuff out there. So, yeah, we've got sources all over the place. We just need to keep looking. Yeah.
How about skin contact contact with in rivers that you're
Good
swimming in?
question, I totally forgot to tell you that. At this point, there is limited information, but all of the studies at this point say that dermal exposure is not an issue. You're not gonna get dermal absorption through the skin. Probably it was an issue for like the workers at DuPont, the workers at 3M, where they were actually coming into contact with the product. But at 70 parts per trillion or higher, it's not gonna soak in through the skin. The number one route of exposure is through ingestion. So ingestion is where we're trying to, so we've put out foam advisories, not that you would need a foam advisory, but you know how we always like to do our CYA. Don't eat the foam, okay? That's what the advisory said. If you're at the Rockford Dam, don't eat the foam. Or if you're at the Rockford Dam and you're putting in your canoe, your kayak, whatever, when you get out of the water, wash your hands. Now that's, you guys know what's in water bodies anyways, you should wash your hands, because that's just gross. But when you get out, if you have that, if you're dipping your hands through that surface water body and there's that micro layer at the top, then you could potentially have some PFOS, PFOA on your hands. Is it one-time exposure gonna be a big deal? No. But, it's repeated stuff. It's the guys who fish at the dam. It's the guys who are there all the time that may get more incidental exposure that we'd be worried about. But contact through the shower heads, through, normal stuff is not really that big a deal. I think we did advise that, for those homes that have a point of use filter so they can drink the filtered water that they use, like for cooking and stuff, they use the filtered water as well. But again, it would be pretty much incidental. Yeah.
So with pregnant women, what would be the top 5 things that they could do to reduce their risks?
Well, I think they need to look at their environment. Where do they live? What are they drinking? So, obviously water's still the best. And if they're on municipal water, it's been tested, they should be fine. If they're, it's like anything. If you're eating a ton of microwave popcorn, if you're eating, you're drinking a ton of pop, there's things that, moderation is always the key when you're pregnant. I don't think that there's any one thing, unless they're sitting next to a known site of environmental contamination, that they really need to do. I just think they just need to take care of themselves and be smart, but you probably give them all that advice all the time, so, yeah. Anything else?
Just a quick question here. Obviously, they didn't do any testing when they first created this as far as what effect it would have on the environment. It was years later after the fact. So what about compounds now? Are they tested now, other compounds, before they release them?
Wouldn't that be a smart thing to do? Wouldn't that be a smart thing to do? I would love that. For some reason, apparently our chemical industry doesn't think that's necessary. So no, that's the problem we have here, is we have this constant cycle of let's create a new chemical to replace the bad chemical, and then it'll take us 50 years to figure out what the new good chemical did that was bad, and they've already made the replacement for that. So DuPont did that. They took the PFOS, PFOA out, made their new generation, which is called Gen X. Gen X now is impacting the groundwater down in West Virginia and other locations as well, North Carolina, I think.
You figure too, with the cuts in the EPA that are going on, it's probably going to be even worse then.
Yeah, somehow Europe does it. I don't know if you've read much on what Europe does with their chemicals, but they have to actually demonstrate that they're safe. So, it seems like if we don't learn anything from our mistakes, that this one should be a big one, because the other thing we haven't mentioned with this whole business is that although PFOS, PFOA it doesn't evaporate, so it's not volatile, so to speak, it can travel through the air. So you get and this is what has happened out east, quite a few different production facilities, they will take say a textile manufacturer that is spraying PFOS on their fabric to make it Scotch guarded. That dust, as they are knitting up through their smokestacks, that dust can have a PFOS molecule on the particle. As it gets airborne, travels through our atmosphere 5-10 miles, it redeposits. It's depositing at high enough concentrations that we can start a groundwater contamination in an area that would have no other source otherwise, and then you can end up with groundwater plumes there. So that's, again, that whole interrelated connectivity issue of being in our atmosphere and in our ecosystem that we still are trying to figure out, but we know that that's an issue. We just don't have a good way to track that yet.
Well, I know it's
Yeah, sorry.
1 o'clock, and I want to thank both you and Paul for coming today, and
You're welcome.